excited to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Happy Friday.
Yes, Friday is a good day to record a podcast. I talk to you approximately 900,000 times a day, so this just feels like another time, another conversation. But I thought it would be really fun to have you on the podcast to talk about all the stuff we deal with the CLM practice currently. And I thought, what better opportunity to chat through, some of the stuff we deal with on the day to day implementing CLM Tech. And I know how much I rely on you and how wonderful your background is and all the great things you do around process design and solutioning for CLM on projects that we work on together. But I'm going to ask you to do some humble bragging about your background and how you got to Elevate. So tell us all a little bit about Ryan Sawyer.
Well, I hope it's an interesting subject, but I think that I'm on a mission in this industry to actually bring like more people like myself into the mix because we have technologists and we have all these people that have been in law for so long. And interestingly enough, for people listening, I actually am the outsider. I'm an aerospace engineer by trade. So everybody always asks me that, like, how did you get into doing legal? So I think maybe the best place to start is that I am an Air Force veteran.
Mm-hmm.
I did 6 years in the military, but during that time, my what they call AFSC was I changed a couple times, but primarily where I started was avionics engineering and specifically in flight operations. So think radios and radars and ground controls and teaching pilots basically that are brand new how to use their controls. So anybody that's ever been in the military or talked to a military person, it deals with things like wire diagrams and processes.
Yeah.
When you teach a pilot to fly, it is as extraordinarily detailed as possible because of so much risk involved. Of course, you're asking a bunch of like 19 and 20-year-old kids to go out and teach pilots to fly. So
Right?
anybody ever asked me, do you ever fly with people you trained? No, because I was 19 years old. Not a chance. But I think it's important to note that it is as highly detailed. And I, of course, didn't know this at 19. I just thought it was an annoying 192-step process to start an engine of an aircraft. And I had to teach some, buddy that literally had a little bit. Of course, I was a 19-year-old that was paying my own way through college, full-time, plus military, plus raising a daughter because I was 20 when she was born by myself. I was like, oh, these guys have it made. They jump into an aircraft and I'm teaching them 192 steps. I never thought about the fact that I'm 19 years old teaching them to fly a multi-million-dollar aircraft and they've never flown anything other than a simulator, right?
Yeah. Right.
So, and when it breaks, I needed to know out on the flight line how it works. So you pull into a wire diagram. So fast forward, I get out of the military. I'm a single dad. I need to make money. So I thought I had to work in aerospace. And the only place hiring at the time was Honeywell.
Mm-hmm.
I started off there right after the military. And I worked in what they call their AOG desk, which is aircraft on ground.
Uh-huh.
And it talks to pilots or flight engineers in flight or that have recently landed saying, hey, something's wrong with my aircraft. And these are like really fancy aircraft, like
Right?
business and general
Millions of
aviation.
dollars, right?
Where Cammy's going to be after all her books are published, right? Like that's private jet city.
Let us settle.
Cammy and a G5 flying along.
Yes,
But
I'm about that.
they make them in all colors is all I can say. But pink or purple would be great for you. But it was interesting though because I get in there and the same thing happens. So here I am repeating another military. I think I can only train pilots, but yet here I am talking to people in flight trying to troubleshoot a radar. And it takes that other part of it. So now I have a wire diagram. I have a talking checklist of how to troubleshoot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in a call center in the early 2000s. And somebody once said to me, hey, do you want to go internationally? So I basically was in the right place at the right time because nobody had a passport except for me. And I have a passport.
I have a passport and I will travel.
Oh, it was amazing. Within 4 days, I'm in the Czech Republic and I'm going into like different areas of Eastern Europe, hiring people to do what I did.
Yeah.
But, of course, you look at that and you're like, well, how am I going to train people that they had graduated from college in aerospace? They had never even been on a flight, let alone talk to a pilot. And it came back down to, well, I know how to write a process manual a technical manual, because I did that in the military. Well, I did that for about 5 years at Honeywell, writing technical manuals and telling people how to do their job through the lens of a call center, like it's step by step by step. And I got into, obviously the craze of Visio and all the lucid charts of the world when they were young. And
Yeah.
let's show people, because I was so used to writing technical manuals and process diagrams.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very lucky because I switched over to a solar company for about 8 years called First Solar, and the world's largest photovoltaic company. But they were having me travel the world. And, one thing that had come up is where I was traveling so much to work on different contracts, like execution of a contract. Hey, help us deliver this service. And I got my people on, same thing, process manuals and playbooks. But they said, hey, while you're out there, will you go talk to all these people? And what I didn't realize at the time is they wanted me to start really getting into strategic alliances. So I started changing my educational path. And I said, how do I build an alliance? And I think most of your listeners will laugh, but my number one problem that I faced for 8 years of this was sales and legal couldn't talk to each other.
Oh,
and then two legal companies could not talk to each other, right?
That story has not changed.
It's kind of funny, huh? Oh, you'll like this one even better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I literally had I guess they call it a job title, but a joking internal job title that at First Solar, I was the guy, the strategic alliance manager, translates legal to legal.
Okay.
Because they would get stalled on these contracts in negotiation, and they would fight over things that just didn't matter, right?
Yes. I've been in those kinds of negotiations before where we're going to dig in. I completely understand.
Well, and it's maddening, right? Like why are we fighting over something that really is a low risk to me? I don't care if I win or lose.
Right.
So I would travel, and I needed these alliances to go through. And lawyers hated working with me because I would go into a meeting and be like, well, let's just go to the point that I care about, right? And we'll worry about everything else. So I made a deal with them that I said, hey, give me a list of what I can say and can't say. You tell me exactly what I can't say. And then I am the guy that will research like crazy. So I took this 50-page list and I bumped it up against everything else that I could find in prior contracts. And I said, nope, here's 5 things I'm not allowed to do.
Yeah.
And I would literally, that's it. And I'd go in and get the deals done.
My experience was similar when I first started as a paralegal, because I was negotiating contracts with sales for my sales team with attorneys. And my GC gave me this is, the thresholds you can negotiate up to, and then you have to get me involved, right? So I sort of had that similar playbook, right? Where it was like, okay, if it's the indemnification is this, I can only go here. And once it went outside those sort of parameters, then I had to go get permission from the GC or bring him in for the negotiation. So playbook style negotiating was something that I'm familiar with too. Same thing.
Well, and I think it's the most lost art in the world because, here I am doing this for a living, and out of nowhere, I basically decide I want to do this for a living. I like fixing these legal problems. It takes the engineering brain, and I would be in a room as the only engineer with all lawyers, or let's be honest, salespeople love to say, I don't care, throw it over the fence. Yeah. But I could improve the speed of their deals, and like you were doing quite heavily, because I knew what I could do and couldn't do. And the salespeople now loved me. So I became this interpreter between the two.
You removed the barriers, right? Quicker, velocity, deal velocity. They were looking for that 20 years ago when I was doing, that role. And that's still one of the major drivers for CLM purchase, right? Is deal velocity and getting out of the way and pulling, self-service for sales and pulling that, the infamous, it's stuck in legal. That's not an excuse anymore, right? When you have CLM in place or the process in place, or, you can move through the playbooks. Yeah.
You're hitting the nail on the head. And that's exactly where I came to you with Elevate. Is about 5 years ago, I tried and I said, I can't manage this at scale because we were doing partner alliances, but think of a master contract with hundreds of SOWs, right? Yeah. And they were European, and I would be getting calls all hours of the day, and that doesn't work after a while. I'm getting older. It doesn't, I can't keep up with it.
Requirements have increased.
And all we had Salesforce as a technology, which, by the way, I'm a massive fan of Salesforce. But at the time, we didn't necessarily have, and this is, let's say 5 years ago. So we're 2016, 17, 18 area. And I'm like, I need some way to track this and be able to pop out to you guys, because I'm just going to post to you my credentialing, my checklist to go through. And I loved the great time at that company, but they just wouldn't do it. Budget, too complex. We just need you. You got to be a middleman. And I had a chance to Elevate. They're like, well, we'd love you to come do something for us. Just show us what you're doing. And I made the jump, the risk of risks, right? I'm coming over. And I was given this very large account at Elevate, and I was told, this is the deal. They do about 4,000 or 5,000 contracts a year. They have a 300-person active sales team that do, the smallest person does 5 deals a year, the biggest person does a bunch. So there's an active cycling of deals, and we want you to train it. Like, so Elevate brought me in, train the sales team to do 80% of every contract.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is how I got into technology, because the first thing I did is I created these flashcards.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what's easier than a flashcard? We've all been doing this since high school,
Right.
or I used to sleep on my flashcards, but I heard they work for education too.
Right? That's funny.
But I trained them. And then what the best thing was, is I got together with a couple of folks at Elevate at the time who were working in technology. And they're like, what is that? And I'm like, flashcard. I said, what is that? They're like, this is called a contract lifecycle management system. And it's like lights and bells and whistles went off.
Yeah.
And we created a clause library, because what's better than a digital flashcard, which is a clause library. Right. And my whole momentum at this point for the last 5, or how it started with CLM, is we built some things together. And now that I know there's technologies on the market, I wish we had started there versus our own, but it was still really good. And we were out to the customer saying, not only am I going to train your team because process matters, but I'm also going to give you a technology to back up the process. And I will say, if you do this with me for 3 months, I will track your deviations, because that was the next step. I have my clauses. I have a way to track a deviation, and then I will report back to you. And you have your parameters: preferred, alternative, and restricted. Right. Preferred being where you should go. Alternatives pre-approved. Restricted needs approvals. And we looked at what's the, pardon the term, the rubber stamp. Who's going through and just getting, like, if you have a limitation of liability and it gets approved every time, we need to change our terms. Yeah. Or if you're okay with the risk that's being accepted, stop asking for approval. Right. And we went from, and I'm not joking about the numbers, it was around 162 days for deals over $10 million. And we went down to 34 days total. And it took us 90 days to get to that first marker. And we held that number. After a year, we actually got down a little further, but basically that's the band. And that's awesome. When you got deals under $1 million, we were getting things done in 72 hours or less.
And so let's talk about the technology and the way that you sort of pulled that off, right? Was it a mix of process changes and technology that you were deploying, and manual review? Like, sort of tell me what you were using to make that jump.
Well, and I've done more now since then. So it's funny you say that, but I come into it with a process mentality always, because I know my deficiency is technology, in the sense of I don't know how to code, build. So you find that person that marries up with you, and I can troubleshoot and write a process. And what's funny is a CLM developer that I was working with at the time, they took what I now know as a requirements gathering. I had a process map, or I had a theory, a process map. I had details to prove it. And I had a written process steps. Hey, customer, I need you to come here, check this card based on these decision trees. And here's how it looks on a process map. If you can't follow that, or at this case, it was the customer salesperson, then you have a problem, right? And the technologist was able to take it and build around it. What's interesting is he asked me also, what else is there in your process, because you're only using this much of the technology. And it's something that I've found with CLM technologies is we have so many customers that buy a technology because of bells and whistles, like I did. I saw this bell and whistle of solving my one problem like this. Right. I want clause tracking deviation. And I needed this team. They had a process engineer. They had a developer. They had this lady that I've been friends with for a long time, who actually could go in and literally translate everything I had into code. And they would give me suggestions. Have you thought about a workflow? Have you thought about approvals? And then the thing that blew my mind is, have you thought about integrating with other tools to make this part of your process faster? So, which is my favorite thing in the entire universe. Please integrate all the tools. Well, and that's just it, because I was solving for this little box, and they solved it for me. But the technology can do so much more. And it took somebody asking me questions about the rest of the process. Like, not just continuous improvement, but if you have a process diagram, and that's the thing that I see so many people missing, is what is your as-is process? And what is your to-be process? I don't want to take my as-is and solve that one problem I've always had, because bad data in, bad data out. I want the to-be process. And that's what I needed, was somebody to teach me, challenge me, and what connects to this part or this part. Let's take this process map and start really showing you where we can do improvements for you, and then keep redoing the process map.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So I think
that's where I leverage technology.
When you and I work together on projects like this, when we're talking about full transformation of the processing, full transformation of the contracting process from like end to end, I always say we need to start with, we need to know who the people are that are involved in that process and touch it. And then we need to map out what the process is currently. And then I always look for opportunities to integrate ahead of and downstream of the CLM tool. So we're always looking at it from end to end, even though oftentimes CLM is the piece that we're focused on, right? So how do you find in requirements gathering for new CLM implementations, how do you find the success if they don't have their process nailed down versus if they come in with, this is what we had and this is what we want? If they've spent that time, what do you think the impact is?
Well, a couple things on that. So first and foremost, I actually don't mind if they don't have their process locked down, because it gives me the chance to walk with them.
Yep.
One key on that I wonder if we can, we should go into, because I'd be curious about you as well. When I go into a team that know their process and have not enough of an outline, but want to engage with me to advise them on the service, I have the freedom to bring in people. And people is absolutely the key here, because I might have a technical team that have hired me to go build a CLM, yet they are technical and care about data flow, data mapping, all those things that come with technology, versus I have used the system as a business user for 20 years. So being able to help build that process map with them and build an as is and a to be at the same time, because I can bring in all these user SMEs. I'll ask those questions. How does this relate to your tax department? Hence what you're saying about the downstream effect or integration.
Yeah.
Sales, 100% of the time. How do your sales get into the funnel of a contract? Because I want to integrate with that system.
Right.
And I think that it's such a key driver that, and I'm not talking about bringing in teams of hundreds, but what is your what I call a tiger team, your decision-making team? If you are not balanced across all of the organization with your customer, then getting requirements, you failed. You need the balance, and you need to help them find that balance. I can't have a technology-rich decision tree, vice versa. I can't have a sales-rich decision tree, or you're going to have a contract with auto signature only.
Right, I know.
So
yeah, for sure. Like I've had a lot of in my hundreds of implementations I've ever done, I see the biggest sort of time suck in an implementation is when you're unbalanced in your stakeholder makeup, where you've got maybe IT's owning the tool, but they're not taking the time to get the feedback from the subject matter experts, like the contract admins or the sales operations support team, that are entering the data in with their little fingers, into a system.
Yep.
And I've seen failed implementations so many times come to us and say, well, legal designed the process or IT designed the process, and they didn't consider they're just solving for their narrow pain point, and they're not looking across the organization. So I think that's what differentiates when you and I work together in looking at process mapping as one of the very first actions we do, because we can see from the air, if you will, what the process can be with all the people that are touching it, right?
Well, and I think that happens too. So exactly, because that's another point. I hear a lot recently in implementations where I want to go into a customer and understand what they want to accomplish. I think some folks will call it success criteria, but I'm always cautious on that terminology, because success can be many things in the end, right? And you're going to inevitably, through a project, uncover things, add things, change things, and success changes. So what is it you want to accomplish? And if your top of the pyramid is, I want to, I'm making some up, but reduce cycle time, centralize a repository, and have reportable data. Now, if I can get to that point, then I can drive every team member, no matter where your world falls in that, your little island, piece of that pie. If it's data flow, you care about reporting and data flow, and you have to have it, I can get you to that top goal. And I can get you there with the same person that cares about the, speed of contracting, order to cash. I can get you there because, we have the top of the pyramid together. Just means we're going to go about finding it differently.
Right.
And I think that goes to who does what, how are you balanced, and I'm going to take feedback from both teams that maybe don't traditionally work together. So it's, I know, a bit overly logical, but I do think that I do think it's something that we, funny enough, miss a lot when we are doing these requirements gatherings.
Yeah, I also find that when, so a lot of times we'll get projects brought to us that are legal led. Elevate plays pretty heavily, because we're a law company, that those are the projects that come to us. And I love that because we speak their language, but where I feel like that can be a detriment is that we don't get to talk to the other stakeholders because it's a very narrow scope where the legal team just wants to get playbooks, or they just want to get their clause library, and they just want to do some self-service contracts, which does help the sales team and deal velocity. But I think that can be detrimental because you're not talking to the entire ecosystem of people that touch contracts, so you have to kind of ferret that out. And you and I do that a lot in scoping with customers, right? About the strategy for implementation. Is it just the legal team? It's legal led, and we only need to deal with this small sort of scope in phase 1 to get it started, and then we can look at the enterprise. But I think you have to consider the enterprise from a whole in design at the beginning. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. And I think that's, I always, say I have a mental model of how a contract lifecycle management should go. And I feel like it sometimes is a bit of a lost art, but we as the consultants coming in on this are there to give that advice. And I have to be able to prepare that mental model for people because I want them to see the value of a diversity, right? Mm-hmm. We all know diversity in the global environment, right, is about idea sharing and betterment. And truthfully, I can learn so much by being diverse. So why are we not applying that to a contract lifecycle implementation? Why not? I mean, it should be in everything we do, but as much here as anywhere else, because technology is going to touch in many tentacles all these other people. And if the idea is singular, then it's never going to proceed. And that's something that I know we do in these discussions. So we can go in and we come in with our mental model of how this should look and how it should work. And I know enough, no matter what the company is, I know that there's obligations management that's going to affect operations and legal. And I know there's tax implications of finance. I have a background in compliance, so I'm real heavy with especially publicly traded companies and Sarbanes-Oxley rules. But the person I'm talking to on the other end of the phone in the requirements gather or decision making and then requirements gathering may not. Right. But I should, as a good consultant, know enough about the person I'm talking to. I should be able to find out what their job is by talking to them and what impacts that I know from my history touch all these other parts, because I've worked now in CLM for quite a few years, but beyond that in the contracting world for a while. I know enough to be dangerous, and I also know enough what other SMEs to bring in. You and I will riff off each other all the time and bring each other into calls because I might have, an engineering background, you have a technology and a legal background, but we can pull on these different questions to the stakeholder and recommend for people to bring in. And that's my job, and it should be my job. And if you don't have that kind of diversity in your thought process, and we as a consultant don't bring that into the requirements gathering questions, or for folks that are doing it internally on their own, right? If you don't have that mindset of what it looks like touching the whole of the business, bring in the SMEs to do it. Because if you do it singularly, you're not going to solve your own problems, right?
Yeah. You might create more for other people.
I mean, if it helps them. It's a little example, but I had worked with this company that had the IT department do everything, and they did not want to diversify. So we went to a demonstration phase because I knew what was happening, and we did a requirements gathering. And I said, okay, we're going to build X and show you Y, right? It was a great relationship. They're like, no, we're good. And what they wanted to solve in the IT department was data flow, and they wanted to have the data mapping, and they wanted to make sure that it was a compliance system for their IT department. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is the way IT did certain things, it wouldn't allow for something like a contract to come back from a customer and upload a red line, right? Yeah. Some of those things that a broadcasting communication, because it can't leave the organization. So it's a closed loop system. Mm-hmm. And until I could show them, I'm like, guys, we're going to miss this big thing. So we get this contract up, and they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't know that's what the business was needing to do. We only had to make this happen for IT.
Yeah.
And they realized they had put themselves a few months behind. I'm not calling them out. They were a great partner, and we ended up getting a great implementation. But it took that moment of no matter how much they wanted to force a singular, their goal of getting all this other data downstream couldn't happen because they had to follow their own rules without knowing the process. Yeah. And they ended up closing the system to not be able to communicate externally. So as a small idea, sometimes singular stops your own goals from happening.
Right.
So,
Right. So you and I have a little bit of a different feeling about process documentation in that you are open to walking through it with them, like in requirements gathering. I want them to bring it with them to the first meeting, and I want to walk through it with them. So the reason I like that is because I like to challenge it, and I like to ask why they do things. It's sort of how I start, and it's not because I'm coming from like a combative, such like a stance. It's more like, it's because I want them to hear themselves say, well, we just do it this way because we've always done it this way. And then I'm like, no, that's not the right answer. Well, I don't point my fingers at customers like that, but that's kind of what I'm thinking is like, let's challenge what we've been doing, and let's challenge our thinking, because this is an opportunity for companies to make, massive changes to their operation and to process to make things faster and often more livable for the employees, that are using systems like this. So I like for them to come to the table with their written out diagram of this is what we do, and then I want to talk about every single step and why. So tell me about your sort of how you would handle that. You like for them to come sort of a little bit unprepared and just talk you through it. So tell me a little bit about your process there.
I see the beauty of both, and I think you hit the nail on the head, because you and I have very similar personalities and different approaches to get there. That's why we've always worked well. But I will say this, like, I can deal with both, and I like both. But the one thing I think we're both coming to the same point, if I can call out, I like a little unprepared, because I'm going to sit down in a process map and start drawing it out for them to the same extent that you're getting to, which is inevitably I'm going to get to a box or a swim lane where somebody with a louder voice than others is going to say, we have to have this role. Like I get that a lot with like certain roles in a contract, like call it a contract specialist, or this person has only entered this particular data set for 5 years. And we know as the contract people and technology people, I can eliminate that with automation. But somebody wants to force that role, and then the project sponsor inevitably is going to be like, wait a second, we have a person entering 5 fields of data and that's their whole job. Yeah. Can't we reposition them to do something more value add to the company? Right. So we both are trying to get to those aha moments. I like doing it sometimes live because I get more engagement. Yeah. But there is a beauty to be able to do it in research and find it quicker. Like I know you're really good at diagnosing and having your 5 or 10, 15 things like, hey guys, here's the big red block on the diagram. We're both getting there, and I like it. The reason I go my approach, if I have a choice, I mean, obviously you can do both, but if I have a choice, I feel like I can build continuity in 2 ways in talking to the people. So I'm a big process and person side, and I know that person's process, tribal knowledge, is important, and I don't think it needs to be void of becoming part of a contract system. Yeah. Contract systems, I think, can inherently absorb tribal knowledge. So what I do is when I do see a person bucking the trend and saying, hey, why do we do that? I can be both a friend and help explain it for the person that is the tribal knowledge owner, or I can back up the process decision person, or I can get the two to talk together. Point is I now get to control that decision, or I can help them control that decision of what the system can do best for you. I want to absorb it because tribal knowledge always ties to something else. We all know that. But we also have to have a reality that this system should eliminate manual steps, and people who make up a specialist who entered those 5 fields now can grow their career somewhere else because there are things that when it's automated they can do. I just like having that ability to help them control that narrative and drive them, because I can interject something about the technology. And these CLMs all uniquely are different, but they all have these cool little things that we can bring to the table. So it's more of a live conversation and ability to control those ha-ha moments and fight moments to get to them where they need to be.
Yeah. You know what? I also like walking through process because I learned so much about how to potentially design the tool just by what they're sharing with me and what they're doing today. And I'll give you some examples. Like you're talking about contract specialists, or you might have a sales operations person, and they're filling in all this information to a contract request form, for example, and then they're emailing that to somebody, and then somebody's getting it, and they're entering that information into their contract template. And so as I'm listening to these things, I can figure out like how we should architect the system to be more efficient, where we can eliminate some of the repetitive data entry like you're talking about. And another thing that I don't know if you think about this when you're designing a solution, but I think when I hear process, I think about security groups and users and how to design like what access and what privileges and roles they have, those users have in the system when we're walking through the swim lanes. So I can kind of conceptualize like, okay, well, this user only needs to do X, Y, and Z, so they don't need all the privileges. Or this user should stay in this group but have visibility over here and over here and over here. Like I can mentally kind of design that as I'm hearing them talk. Do you do that too with when you hear the process, like you're sort of mentally orchestrating it in your head?
Absolutely. I try to lead them to the water, right? That's the goal, right? Like I want to help them see because, and I'd be curious about your opinion on this, but I always think too, like, a lot of companies come to us and they're like, we have a SharePoint repository. And it's that moment of like, ooh, okay, how do we help you? And today, either nobody has access and it's a frustration point, or there is no security group. There is no segregation of like duties on these contracts. And unfortunately, this is this is a great topic because it's such a vibrant concept to people. I don't think most people I talk to even know what they can do with it over time and like how it can enhance them to them. So we always end up having that initial conversation of like, well, everybody needs to see these contracts or nobody should see these contracts because that's what they've always done. Right. So I love to be able to hear and make that model because I think it's a lost portion of a lot of these designs that your security groups can really help focus people's energy where they should be. Right. And that's what I try to tell them is like, think along the lines of what's going to get you to the place fast. It's like this group, like instead of somebody being able to see every contract, they can only see their contracts, and now they can focus and they can use all these other cool features, tools, reports, dashboards, and go through.
And when you're thinking about designing the system and the process of 2B, what it's going to be, the unicorn's going to be like the rainbows when you're done, is that like even from the inception of SSO, when somebody logs on from their computer in the morning, we can feed that profile information into the CLM tool so that by the time that person, if they are, entering data into the CLM tool, they have a streamlined data entry experience because we can take that information of where they belong in the organization, what privileges we want to assign to them, and they just have a customized experience based on what we do design at the front end with security and automation that way. So again, another reason why process is so important is because if you're thinking about it from the minute you log onto your computer, there's opportunity from the minute they log on to automate.
What's interesting is I fully love to hear about that because I think it is such a high technology. It's a really great complex thing that could be, it's a simple solution. It's a simple way to build it in a lot of these tools, but it's a complex to the customer because you could be so fancy with it. And I can add one thing to your statement that I always find too, that people come to me in these CLM implementations, they'll say, you don't understand. I have a highly specialized job. How often do you hear that, right?
You don't understand. Yes, I hear that often.
No other company on earth does it like I do. Do you intake? Do you review? Do you negotiate? But
I hear that a lot.
Security groups allow for that specialization. Yeah. And I'm not trying to make people feel like it's not, jokingly, we want everybody to feel like they have a special use in the tool. But security groups and permissions actually give them the ability to do that. Right. Like, okay, your job's special, you're unique. You can be unique here. Yes. Because we know the tool helps standardization. The tool helps streamlining. So inherently, we're going to force processes to be fast and in the swim lanes. Right. But the security groups allow for that specialization and that unique feeling or a unique process that a company wants to keep unique. Right. How do I still do my process? And how do I keep people in a process but have these people be special? That's the tool. That's the tool to do so. And you can still have apples to apples comparisons on your reports. Yeah, I love that. And then, even down to the only agreement types that they can draft show up based on their security level, right? And so it really like locks down the organization, but in a good way where it makes that person feel empowered to create the agreements that they're allowed to create by their security profile and self-serve as much as they can. So allow the system to do all the hard work
for you, right? That's what's so exciting, is when the system can handle it for you, and then you just get to log on in the morning and, go about your day in whatever application you want to live in, and contract. And that's massive for most organizations, I think.
Well, and I'm sure you get this feedback too, but I mean, I at least my personal journey into CLM, so not even the implementations I do, but my personal use of a CLM, I get to be an expert in my field. And everybody's like, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, I have so much information at my fingertips of what I do. You can't ask me about Canvas because I only have a loose idea. But based on my permissions in my box, I will tell you everything you need to know about implementations. I can list them. I can tell you money and dollars and time and where are my constraints. And I have always I love especially this role at most implementations we do, when you have the person that maybe isn't the system admin. They are in legal companies a lot of time, or legal departments, it's a paralegal, or in purchasing departments, it's a supply chain leader of some sort, where they're in the tool every day. They're doing a lot of contracts, but they're doing obligations, or they're doing some kind of reporting, and they are by far now the intelligence expert of the company. And it just enhances their role in their career. In fact, I even have one that came with me to Elevate after time, and now works in our legal department at Elevate, one of our port BUs of Elevate, doing just that, mass analytics and helping drive change based on an analytical mindset. But how did it happen? It's just because she walked in on day one and knew how to use the CLM.
Yeah.
And she created herself a role.
Yep.
So that's one of my favorite things, especially with security groups, is she has access to view only. She has access to certain contracts specific to this portion of Elevate. But she can run with it like crazy.
That's a great story. I love that. I was just going to kind of switch gears, because I was thinking a minute ago, you said something about, when you show the teams like the build for the first time, you were kind of talking about visualizing the process, I think was what you said. And it's almost a funny moment to me in every single implementation, because I come to it with such anticipation of when the people see the tool for the first time after we've gone through these months of requirements, and you can always tell if you've done your job well as an implementation consultant or someone providing advisory services on the design and solution, when the reaction is like, oh, this is amazing. And they're so excited, and you've asked the right questions, and you brought the right people, and you've captured it, right? And then there's the other side of that coin, where the people see the tool for the first time and they're like, what is this? And, that's the worst feeling ever. And I just wondered, how many times has that happened to you in your career, where you didn't have the right people at the table, and you showed them for the first time, and you couldn't hide under the desk fast enough? Has that happened to you before?
Oh my gosh. I have one in mind specifically where it was so quiet. And pin drop wasn't even in it. It was so quiet, I could hear the white noise, right? Yeah. And every ounce of me had to fight my finger from faking internet connection and just hanging up. I was it's fighting my own hand. And but I will say this: what I've learned about those moments is, maybe this is a bit selfish, our mental models haven't been wrong, or even the design isn't necessarily wrong. You hit part of it. There's two parts. First, it's the wrong people are in the room, because, and I'm not trying to call anybody out, but the technology team doesn't care about the user interface.
No. They care about the data.
Right. You're right. So I've designed it, and there's no user interface pizzazz, and you have these users in there that are
this looks horrible, or whatever. Yeah.
Right. But the second one is, I have learned the hard way, and I will admit, early on 5 years ago, I would drop that initial bomb of, let me get all your requirements, and by the way, here's the system, jazz hands.
Right.
And that's not the way to go either. I have been much better at stakeholder demonstrations, even if it's not necessarily during design, although I could advocate for a benefit of doing demos, because you jog people during the design phases when they see the tool. But so that's my advocate. But at minimum, during configuration, hey, this is not your system. Here's a sandbox. But hey, this is kind of a theory. So as you guys are talking, you create champions that way.
Right.
And I'm really big on creating champions in the process. I want to show people, hey, here's some expectations. And maybe I solicit a little feedback, but believe it or not, I rarely get feedback. if anything, I get people that don't get quiet in those first meetings, because if there's silence, they will initially stand up and say, yeah, I know, because our system does this, this, and this next, right? Good. I got somebody that's a champion that knows what's coming next. So my advice to anybody is silence is not golden. No. In this case, right. Show often, take the time. It's worth 30 minutes of my time to even demonstrate little portions. And especially when you have stakeholders, if you've done the job right and you've diversified, I can show an e-signature portion, integration and portion to a compliance master who loves it. I can show to the legal department a clause library, and then to the other whole stakeholders, I can show intake and how quick it can be. In the end, to the IT team, here's what a report looks like, and inherently they're going to know where there's data mapping in the background. Those 30-minute sessions a couple times will save you down the road so much. So
yeah, I agree with you. I also like to, when I'm doing requirements gathering, I like to show snippets of the system, because I want them to understand why I'm asking the questions I'm asking. So like, if I'm asking them what their master data is, and I want to see the contract, and I want to see all the fields in that preamble that have to be populated, like when I'm talking about master data, I'm talking about vendors or customers. And so it's the name, it's the address, it's the, whatever it is in the preamble, and how you contract, and then how that master data can flow into the contract at the end. And then even better, when you're doing the data entry in the system, if you're starting within the platform, you have that, you can kind of visualize this as I'm talking through it. If you have that drop down that says customer name, and you can go through the drop down and you can select, Ryan Sawyer Inc. And then you don't have to enter anything else. It just flows through into the agreement. And so where I was going with that is being able to show the customer why I'm wanting that data and where it's going to flow to in a requirements gathering session. Then they're like, oh, and it just, visualization and requirements gathering of the process is so helpful, I think, in getting customer buy-in. Do you feel that way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the buy-in portion is still an enigma over time, right? Because I'm very good, I think, and I say we as an industry, we're really good at a couple of people, but I don't think anybody's cracked the magic nut of getting everybody to buy in, right? And champions are going to get us there, but I think all of us have faced these things in implementations, especially. The technology itself is so wonderful. It's beautiful. It's complex, and it does so many things. But champions are needed to get people to use it and grow. Gosh, just like artificial intelligence, it needs time to grow and learn. Excitement needs time to grow and learn. The best thing I've ever done is followed up with somebody 6 months down the road, because the buy-in doesn't happen until they get excited.
Right.
So as we get better at implementations, getting buy-in earlier, to me, relates to champions, relates to ownership, relates to all those things, and excitement, and how to build it. Again, when you have a 12 to 18 to 20 week implementation, how do you get that earlier on? How do you get that ownership, excitement, buy-in? We're trying everything. We're trying, more reporting, more notifications, more demonstrations. And it isn't just about more. It's also about hyper-focusing. Like, I'm not wasting your time. I come back with intelligent feedback. Like, you and I approach the process mapping slightly different, but I'm never going to have somebody stay with me for 5-6 sessions. I'm going to come back and I'm going to have intelligent follow-up questions. So by the second or third time we speak, I know your process and you feel like comfortable in me. Right. But I still think there's more to be done. We just got to keep working that angle, because buy-in is everything.
Yeah, and I think that, most customers that come to us, they're craving, how do we get ready for this? And there's great resources out there about how to get ready in CLM readiness. And one of the things I mentioned is bring your process to the table, bring your stakeholders to the table, bring your contracts to the table, tell us about your approvals, tell us about your signature policies. Like, plan on bringing all that as your homework to the table, so that we can, spread it all out on the proverbial table and talk through, like, how are we going to architect this for the best and highest good for everyone. That's my approach when I come into gathering requirements. What do you think is the top, like, maybe if you could summarize, what are the top 3 most important things that you think customers should bring to the table when they're getting ready to implement?
Cami Paulson. Is that kind of as one?
I think you're biased, guy.
Number 2, the CLM RX book.
Oh, yes, thank you. I didn't pay you to plug, but that's really nice. Thanks.
And then number 3, food because we have a lot of work to do.
Yes,
so let's talk.
Please cater. Please cater. That's important. Yes, that's important.
But I mean, jokes aside, if I was a customer and I wanted, or if I ever have the opportunity someday and I'm working on the side of putting a CLM in my own company kind of thing, the three things to bring to the table, that's the question, right? 100% a diversified group.
Yeah.
I mean, that's number one. Number two, aligned business goals with your leadership at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Now, as a consultant, you might help me curb those or get those around, but I need to know why I am doing this, right? And then number three, your roles and responsibilities as much as possible on the customer side. What I mean by that is everything changes, things adapt. We're going to have a RC chart, a roles and responsibilities chart on our side in the project, but from a customer standpoint, who is a decision maker?
Yes.
Who is a tiebreaker? And we not fail, but we delay a lot of implementations because of unwanted change requests, or why did you change this, or who owns this? Timely decisions, and it isn't just decision makers. I also want to know who is the business person, who is going to be an SME on these things. As a customer, you're going to save yourself a lot of money and time if you know who the organization is. And I know this is like, you said three things, I'm going to say 3A. So within that organization of who's what, also take the time to reduce it, because you don't want 50, 60 people doing your implementation. Yeah. Everybody's opinion matters, but I promise you, if you choose the right 5, 10, or 15 people, you're going to move quicker and cheaper. And those folks are going to be your champions, but they're also going to be, if you select the right people, the ones who are really good at getting internal feedback.
Right.
So I think those three things are what you need as a customer to prepare.
That's great. And then I think I have one last question that I'm curious about, and that's how similar is implementing CLM to training pilots to fly multi-million-dollar aircraft?
I'm scared of both. No, I joke, and I have only had great experiences. And I mean, I'm like a little kid. I still watch airplanes go overhead. I'll literally stop and just watch. And I mean, I've been in the air, on the ground. I've done it all. So it's funny you ask that, because we haven't talked about this a lot before, but I still think I made the right career change, because it is the same. It isn't, I mean, it is a playbook, a process, a diagram, all the things that go into flying. But you know what's crazy? And it's just like a CLM. What is the one part of flying that's the fastest? I get asked this question, and I say, the actual flight itself. I don't care if you're going from Phoenix to Dubai, or you're going from New York City to Buffalo. That's the shortest part. So much preparation goes into flying. Flight tests, flight checks, product checks. I mean, just because an aircraft is built, think about how much went into building that aircraft. You know, part manufacturing, milling, actual getting the specifications, testing, quality control. Technology is the same thing. The actual act of initiating a contract to e-signature, if I do my job right, is super fast, right? And everybody's happy it makes money. It is. But the amount of planning, preparation, and go through doesn't have to be crippling. It's not like, I mean, but in the same vein as a contract, flying, if you do it right and you do it to a process and you know what you're trying to build, you know your specifications, you have your quality checks, you can do it. I mean, look, they can manufacture an aircraft like a multi-million-dollar fighter jet in under 3 days now. They really can, because they have the process in place. These CLMs are so prominent now. If you have the right implementation partner, you have the right structure as a customer, and you approach it like that, and you put your 3-4 months into implementing and doing it right and concise and knowing your processes, documenting it, doing it together, the act of the contract is going to be fast. So that's how similar they are. I don't think it's any different than what I was doing 20 years ago.
That's awesome, Ryan. I think that's perfect. We should end on that. This was so much fun. Thank you so much for joining. Now we know how being an aerospace engineer is very helpful in CLM